Okay, so this is a very quick introduction to GarageBand. So, guys, like we said, on our software, on our computer in school, we have two different software programs. We have Logic Pro and we have GarageBand. I mean, Logic Pro is probably a better program, but GarageBand is a more accessible program, meaning you can get this yourself a lot easier at home. It's a lot cheaper. If you have an iPhone, GarageBand very often comes for free on your iPhone. If you use any sort of Apple product, it's very Apple friendly. So just keep that in mind. So all I'm going to do here is, in advance of you coming into the studio, just to show you a few little pointers about how to basically just set up a file on GarageBand, and so you can tinker around with this yourself. In advance of coming into the studio for our classes on Friday. So when you open up GarageBand, first of all, and this is what I will be doing in the studio initially, but you will actually be doing this yourself. I'm showing you how to do this so that you can do this yourself. I'm not going to be doing all this for you, okay? So a good idea to nominate somebody in the band initially to be the producer for the first session, somebody for the second session, and somebody for the third session, and so on, okay? So the first thing you do is you need to set up a new what's called empty project. So when you open GarageBand, this option comes up. So a project is what you're creating. I know obviously it's a piece of music you're making. In our case, it's a song, but the generic term for something you make in GarageBand is a project. The first thing it will ask you is, what do you want to record first of all? So in GarageBand, we make tracks. So let's say, for example, you have a band that has a drummer, a bass guitar player, a keyboard player, a guitar player, and a singer. It would be a typical lineup for a band. Well, you would record the singer's part onto one track. The guitar player gets recorded onto another track, and so on. And that is the way recordings are made across the world, okay? Unless you might have a very specific reason to record everybody onto one track, but for the most part, we record each individual instrument or voice or sound onto a track. A track might just have one sound on it. So let's say, for example, you want the sound of thunder somewhere in your song. You can make a track just to put in a sound effect for that 1 second even, you know what I mean? So no matter how short or how long your tracks are, everything should be recorded onto one track. Typically, we would start by putting down maybe a drum line, and also what we call a guide vocal track. So I mentioned this in class. We put down a guide vocal track, which is somebody just singing the vocal line without any real work or effects or processing gone onto it. And then we tidy that up later on by putting a real vocal track in. So for example, I'm going to start off here. So the different options you have here are software instrument. And in our studio, that would be the keyboard. And if I select this, the GarageBand will recognize in the studio that it's the keyboard hooked up to the to GarageBand, and you highlight that and just click create. And the great thing about the keyboard here is by default it's set to this classic electric piano sound. But what you were recording with your keyboard, when you play music onto the keyboard and put it into and press record and record onto GarageBand, but what you're doing there is you're recording using what's called MIDI, which stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. It's a computer language which can be manipulated very easily. So let's say I record something on the piano. I can then subsequently, after I record it, change it to all these different sounds here, like orchestral sounds, percussion sounds, synthesizer sounds, or like we saw there's some really cool dancey kind of sounds that you can use here. So that's MIDI. So you can do whatever you want there. Like I recorded the bass line there by just clicking on bass, and I put on whatever. I can't quite remember what bass line I used for it. You might then put a drum line down on top of it. Now remember, the way we're doing it in class is we are using just the AI drummer, if you like. Okay, so I'm gonna put in new track here. So the way I add over here to show you what I did there. There's my first track. I'm then going to add in another track. So for example, a drummer, double click on the drummer, and it actually makes the drum line for you. Okay, now again, I haven't actually put any bass music in there, but it, generally speaking, is quite good at recognizing what you've recorded, and it will create a drum line for you. And then you might want to put in a vocal line on top of it, so you use that track there. That's the microphone there. Now, as you can see, I'm just talking at the computer there. You can see that it's picking me up and so on like that. In the studio, you'll be talking to a microphone, and the microphone gets input into the mixing desk, and you can manipulate that, put all sorts of effects onto it and stuff like that. And we can kind of manipulate the sound of the voice over here. You know, it gives you loads of what we call presets here, so you can mess around with this. You don't have to decide on this before you're recording. So let's say you record your line. You can then change the processing effects that are added to your vocal line subsequently, like after you've done it. So don't feel you have to nail this right from the start. The computer will work with the raw material you've put in, which is your audio recording. Just to note that when we record audio, now audio is your actual voice, for example, or if you record an actual guitar line or a real instrument being played in, that's what we call audio. We don't have the same amount of editing possibilities with audio as we do with MIDI. MIDI is just as a computer information. We can mess around with it all we want. Audio, you're slightly more limited with, but there are still lots you can do with it. And then say, so there I have, that's how I set up my bass line, a drum line, a vocal line, and let's just set up a guitar track as well. So you double click there, and it is set, it's set to like an electric guitar sound. You can see there, I can change this to crunch guitar, distorted guitar, you name it, okay? Ideally, like I suppose a lot of you will do acoustic guitar. So acoustic guitar, sorry, I should be back here. There, acoustic guitar. So you can have different kinds of acoustic guitar. You see, Garageband will edit this all in. So if you record it in just what we call dry, literally press record and record your guitar line in, it will sound very plain and possibly, I would argue, uninteresting and dull. It's the effects that you put on afterwards can make it sound a lot more interesting and stuff like that. So guys, they are how you set up your tracks. To record it, I will go through this in the next tutorial when we're in class. We're gonna, you know, it's fairly obvious, you know, hitting the record button and so on here like that, but you just need to get to grips with how to record that, how to set up your track there. So there you go, guys. I will see you all on Friday, and this is just a little introduction to it. Okay, thanks everyone. I'm done.